The history of Mexico City is inseparable from the geography of the Valley of Mexico, a high-altitude basin surrounded by volcanic mountains and crossed for millennia by lakes, springs, and seasonal rivers. Long before the city became one of the largest urban centers in the world, the valley itself shaped human settlement through its fertile soils, abundant water, and strategic location at the crossroads of Mesoamerica. Archaeological evidence indicates that human presence in the valley dates back at least 12,000 years, when small groups of hunter-gatherers moved through the region following megafauna and exploiting seasonal plant resources. Over time, as the climate stabilized after the last ice age, these groups began to establish more permanent settlements, experimenting with agriculture, particularly the cultivation of maize, beans, squash, and chili peppers, which would become foundational to Mesoamerican civilization. By the 2nd millennium BCE, the Valley of Mexico had developed into a mosaic of villages and ceremonial centers connected through trade, kinship, and shared religious traditions. The domestication of maize allowed for population growth, social stratification, and increasingly complex political organization. Early settlements such as Tlatelolco and Cuicuilco demonstrate sophisticated artistic expression, long-distance trade networks, and ritual practices centered on fertility, water, and cosmic order. Cuicuilco, located near the southern edge of the valley, emerged as one of the earliest urban centers in central Mexico, featuring monumental architecture including a large circular pyramid. Its sudden decline around the 1st century BC, likely due to volcanic eruptions from the nearby Zaital volcano, reshaped the political landscape of the valley and opened space for new centers of power to emerge. One such center was Teotihuacan, located in the northeastern part of the valley. By the 1st centuries of the Common Era, Teotihuacan had grown into one of the largest cities in the ancient world, with a population estimated between 100,000 and 200,000 although not located on the exact site of modern Mexico City. Teotihuacan exerted profound influence over the entire region and laid many of the cultural, architectural, and ideological foundations that later civilizations would inherit. The city was meticulously planned along a grid aligned with astronomical and cosmological principles, dominated by monumental structures such as the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Avenue of the Dead. Teotihuacan was not merely a political capital but a religious and economic hub whose influence extended across as evidenced by its presence in Maya cities, Gulf Coast regions, and Oaxaca. The decline of Teotihuacan around the 7th century CE did not bring an end to urban life in the Valley of Mexico, but rather initiated a period of political fragmentation and cultural transformation. Smaller city-states rose and fell, including Xochicalco, Cholula, and later Tula, the legendary capital associated with the These societies preserved and transformed earlier traditions, particularly the worship of feathered serpent deities, concepts of sacred kingship, and militarized political organization. By the late post-classic period, the valley was densely populated and politically contested with multiple ethnic groups, including the Topanex, Acolhua, Colca, and Mexica, vying for dominance. The Mexica, later known as the Aztecs, arrived relatively late to the Valley of Mexico, probably in the 13th century. According to their own historical traditions, they were a migratory people from a mythical northern homeland called Aztec. Initially marginalized and viewed as outsiders, the Mexica settled on small islands and marshy lands in Lake Texcoco areas, considered undesirable by more established powers. In 1325, guided by religious prophecy that promised a sign of an eagle perched on a cactus, they founded the city of Tenochtitlan on an island in the lake. This moment marks the direct origin of Mexico City. Though at the time it was a precarious settlement surrounded by water, vulnerable to floods, and dependent on neighboring cities. Through a combination of military skill, strategic alliances, and religious legitimacy, the Mexica transformed Tenochtitlan from a marginal settlement into the capital of a powerful empire within 2 centuries. Central to this transformation was the formation of the Triple Alliance between Texcoco and Tlacopan, which allowed the Mexica to dominate much of central and southern Mexico. Tenochtitlan itself became a marvel of urban engineering, featuring causeways connecting it to the mainland. canals that functioned as transportation routes, and Chinempa's artificial, agricultural island stat produced enormous quantities of food. Spanish observers would later compare the city to Venice, astonished by its scale, organization, and beauty. By the early 16th century, Tenochtitlan was home to an estimated 200,000 to 250,000 inhabitants, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. At its center stood the Templo Mayor, a massive ceremonial complex dedicated primarily to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, symbolizing war and rain, conquest, and fertility. The city was not only a political capital, but also a religious and economic center, with vast marketplaces such as Tlatelolco, where tens of thousands of people gathered daily to trade goods from across the empire. Social life in the city was highly structured, with clear distinctions between nobles, commoners, priests, warriors, artisans, and slaves, yet also characterized by extensive education systems, legal institutions, and cultural production. This flourishing indigenous metropolis encountered a catastrophic turning point in 1519 with the arrival of Spanish conquistadors, led by Hernan Cortes. The encounter between the Mexican and the Spanish was shaped by misunderstanding, diplomacy, violence, and deep asymmetries in military technology and disease immunity. After initial negotiations and a period of uneasy coexistence, conflict escalated into open warfare. The siege of Tenochtitlan in 1521 resulted in the near-total destruction of the city, massive loss of life, and the collapse of the Aztec Empire. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not merely a military defeat, but a profound civilizational rupture. That marked the beginning of a new historical era for the city and the region. On the ruins of Tenochtitlan, the Spanish established Mexico City as the capital of the Viceroyalty of New Spain. Rather than abandoning the island city, they rebuilt it, appropriating indigenous labor, knowledge, and infrastructure while imposing European architectural forms, political institutions, and religious authority. Churches were constructed atop former temples, Spanish-style plazas replaced ceremonial precincts, and a rigid colonial social hierarchy emerged. Mexico City quickly became the administrative, economic, and ecclesiastical center of Spanish power in the Americas, linking Europe, Africa, and Asia through global trade networks. From this point onward, the city evolved through centuries of colonial rule, independent struggles, modernization, revolution, and explosive urban growth, each layer leaving enduring marks on its physical form, social structure, and cultural identity. The transformation of the ruined island city into the colonial capital of New Spain unfolded rapidly yet unevenly, shaped by the ambitions of Spanish conquerors, the resilience of indigenous populations, and the environmental constraints of the lacustrine landscape. Mexico City became the seat of viceregal authority in 1535, serving as the political heart of Spain's American empire. The Spanish imposed a new urban order modeled on Renaissance ideals, with a central Plaza Mayor. Now the Zócalos, surrounded by symbols of power, the cathedral, the viceregal palace, and municipal buildings. Yet beneath this imposed order lay the enduring foundations of Tenochtitlan. Indigenous roads became colonial streets, canals continued to serve as transportation arteries, and native labor sustained construction, agriculture, and domestic life. The demographic collapse of the indigenous population in the decades following conquest was one of the most profound and tragic transformations in the city's history. Epidemics of smallpox, measles, typhus, and other diseases introduced from Europe decimated native communities, reducing the population of the Valley of Mexico by as much as 80 to 90% within a century. This catastrophe reshaped the social fabric of the city, creating labor shortages and accelerating the importation of enslaved Africans while also leading to the reorganization of indigenous communities into segregated neighborhoods known as barrios. Despite their marginalization, indigenous peoples remained the majority of the city's population well into the colonial period and played a central role in preserving linguistic, cultural, and religious traditions, often blending them with imposed Catholic practices. Mexico City became a focal point of cultural exchange and intellectual life in the Americas. The establishment of the Royal and Pontifical University of Mexico in 1551, one of the first universities in the New World, reflected the city's growing importance as a center of learning. Printing presses produced religious texts, legal codes, and literary works, while artists and architects developed distinctive styles that blended European Baroque forms with indigenous motifs. The construction of the Metropolitan Cathedral, spanning more than 2 centuries, symbolized both the ambition and the contradictions of colonial society rising monumentally from unstable, waterlogged ground, even as it asserted the dominance of Catholicism over the spiritual landscape. Economically, Mexico City thrived as the administrative hub of a vast, silver-based economy. Wealth from mines in Zacatecas, Guanajuato, and other regions flowed through the city, financing grand residences, religious institutions, and public works. The city's markets remained vital spaces of exchange where indigenous vendors sold food, textiles, and crafts alongside imported goods from Europe and Asia. Through the Manila galleon trade, Mexico City became indirectly connected to China, Japan, and Southeast Asia, making it one of the earliest truly global cities. Yet prosperity coexisted with persistent challenges. Flooding was a constant threat, as the Spanish largely failed to adapt to the sophisticated water management systems developed by earlier civilizations. Efforts to drain the lakes surrounding the city, beginning in the early 17th century, fundamentally altered the valley's ecology. Massive engineering projects, such as the Huetoca Drainage Canal, aimed to protect the city from inundation but instead contributed to long-term environmental instability, subsidence, and water scarcity problems that continue to shape Mexico City's history to this day. Social life in colonial Mexico City was structured by a rigid caste system that categorized individuals according to ancestry, placing Spaniards at the top, followed by Criollos, Mestizos, indigenous peoples, Africans, and various mixed race groups. These classifications influence access to education, employment, and legal rights, reinforcing inequality while also generating complex identities and cultural hybridity. Religious institutions played a dominant role in daily life, regulating morality, education, and charity. While the Inquisition enforced doctrinal conformity and social control,